Hi, it's Alexander Russo with The Grade, and I am so happy to be here today with Oliver Wang to talk about journalism and education and all sorts of other things. Oliver, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
For people who might not know you, and I only know you and your name since yesterday, tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So I'm a freelance journalist. I've been working for about 6 or 7 years. And I mainly write for the New York Times, the New York Times Magazine, but I've written for a bunch of different places. Yeah. And I used to live down in Kentucky, and I write a lot about Appalachia, poverty, economic issues down there.
Right.
But I've also written a lot about science. So kind of a generalist, but yeah.
We're going to talk about all sorts of things, including how to get a gig writing for the New York Times. But since this is a education oriented blog that I run. Tell us a little bit about your own experiences in school. Did you love school? Did you hate it? Public, private?
Uh-huh. Yeah, so I grew up in a town, New Jersey, um, that had like one school system, and I just went to that school system growing up. So K through 12, public school. I enjoyed school. It, I always thought it was a small town, so like, and I like did well. So I always thought I was kind of like special. I was like, oh my God, I'm amazing. This is great. And I think like that part of that was also like, I wanted to do what was right, like there's like an incentive structure in school, like to get good grades and have teachers like, do all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I was like a good kid in that way, and a good student. And then
Were
when I
you,
graduated,
were you,
oh, sorry.
I was just going to
Oh,
say,
sorry.
I
Did you
have
say
a
something?
pet theory, which is
Okay.
I am saying something now. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah. I think there's just a slight delay. For some, I was like looking at your lips moving, but the sound wasn't coming through. And then the sound, sorry. I'll account for that.
Hope,
Yeah, go ahead.
hopefully, the gremlins will figure it out for us. I have a
Yeah.
theory that there are lots of journalists who are class presidents, for better and for worse. And I'm just wondering whether being a good kid and good at school means class president, editor of the paper, and all that stuff.
No, it wasn't. I was not class president, and I did not uh, do any journalism in high school. I think our school had like a small little school paper, but it wasn't really like a big thing there. I was like a sports school. Um, yeah, I was super into science when I was a kid, so I thought I would be like the next Einstein. And then when like that sort of fell through, I was like, well, I'm probably not going to be that next Einstein. Maybe I'll next be like the Edward Witten, who was like this really good physicist. And then that didn't really pan out. And I was like, all right, fine, fine. Maybe you'll be like maybe I'm like a late blooming math prodigy. And that didn't pan out. That was like sort of that was the aspiration when I was a
That's
kid.
hilarious. So journalism was like your 10th career, and you've moved on to other careers since then.
Yeah, it was it's yeah, I mean, journalism, I got into it when I was in college because I went to Princeton for college, which is about an hour south of where I grew up. And there were like a lot more people at Princeton than in my town. And a lot like very talented, very smart, at least like book smart people. Really good at physics. That's sort of what I thought I would do, and they sort of put me to shame. I would, get like 50s on exams, and like
Right.
everyone, he's like, I don't know, for some reason, Romanians are like overrepresented in the physics space. So like we have like really, really smart Romanians, and like whatever IMO medalists, like, ace these exams. And so it was a little bit difficult for me. It was put like hours and hours into one problem, in the library at night and just like not really get it. So that was a little difficult. And I ended up switching to writing, like around, my first year in college or second year in college. I started working for the radio there. And, I was obviously always liked reading. And, yeah, they just sort of took it from there.
And obviously, it went relatively well for you because in a relatively short time, you've started writing for some big outlets, which doesn't happen to your average bear necessarily. How did I think you did public radio first? How
Hmm.
did it? How did the path go for people who are watching and might be curious? And what do you think was the key to your success?
Hmm. I think so. Yeah, the path was I interned for NPR, a podcast that's since been canceled, but was like s- um, somewhat popular at the time, called Invisibilia. It's about like psychology and it was like kind of a mix of psychology and human interest stories. There were a few
Yeah,
people who used to work for This American Life that started it, and they hired me. I think because I was like a little bit weird. I was working in Panama um, the summer after my freshman year of college when I applied to the internship. And I remember there were like howler monkey. I was on like this island, this research island. There were like all these monkeys around. They were howler monkeys, and they would like scream in the morning, just like random times during the day, just shout. And I remember during our interview, they kept on interrupting us. So maybe that like stuck in their mind, and that's why they hired me. So
right.
yeah, and then when I got hired by them, I worked a summer there, and then I just started after that. I like tried to write for their blog, kind of like just shamelessly, like I want to get published. I want to be writing for them. You know, their editors around. You know, it's a NPR, at least in DC, their flagship office. It's like a big newsroom, and just walk by these editors and be like, oh, I want to write about this, you know, and like get lunch with them and that sort of stuff. And yeah, wrote a few things for them, and then afterwards just started like pitching random editors that I would find online for publications that I've been reading for a long time. You know, just look up their emails or guess their email form, and like send them a million pitches, and it annoyed a few, I think, but it worked for some. And yeah, and then I think soon after, or maybe that summer, um, I placed a piece with the New York Times, who's my current editor at the New York Times, and that piece went well, and I just sort of kept writing for them and started expanding out, yeah, from
From
there.
there. So Howler Monkeys gets you the NPR job. What was what was
Maybe.
what was the pitch or the breakthrough, the success story at the Times Magazine?
That was it was a story about two brothers in New Delhi who like had dedicated their lives somewhat uh, inexplicably, I thought, to saving black kites. Black kites are like these carnivorous
Oh, right,
birds that like
right.
scavenge, yeah, all
This is
over
the
the city.
Muslim Hindu thing, right?
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. Because like most of the animal hospitals in Delhi are run by Jains. You know, tenet in Jainism is ahimsa, nonviolence.
Mm-hmm.
So it like motivates a lot of Jains to like have these animal hospitals on temple grounds, but because they're on temple grounds, they also can't, and because ahimsa is a core tenet of religion, they can't handle meat, and so they would try to feed these like birds. Or when they were injured, like pannier, but the birds would like starve, and so eventually they just like turn them away. They have these like the and most of the animal hospitals just say we don't take
Right,
kites, and so these
right,
brothers would sort of go around picking them up, like take them down to their basement, stitch them up, you know, try to like oh yeah, try to rehabilitate them. Yeah, there were sort of these underlying tension. There was this underlying religious tension. Sometimes Nadim and Saud, those were the names of the brothers. They would like explain their motivation in that way. Um, but the more I got to know them, the more I was like, I don't really know how rational it was. It really was. It did feel like sort of this very human obsession with animals and with sort of a cause. Whether or not that was like a justifiable cause. Yeah. So, and another sort of really cool sort of fact about the piece was that most of the black kites were injured in the summer. around Independence Day, which is when kite flying, like paper kite flying, is really popular in the city. So they'll coat the strings of these kites with manja, or like crushed glass, and they'll
Yeah.
fly the kites and sort of play this game, and they'll try to cut their neighbors' strings. Really, really beautiful thing. But like the birds all around the city will fly into the kite strings and cut their wings and fall down and get injured. So it's just sort of a confluence of factors. The way I found this story was this animal hospital that I'd like spent some time around in college. The director there just had like known about the brothers. Like they had maybe like come. Well, I think Nadim had come to Delaware for um, a conference like a few years back in like 2017 or something like that, and she just randomly told me about them, and I like looked them up, and there hadn't been much written about them, and I was like, oh my god! So I got some money from the university. I like petitioned them to get some money to travel to India, and I did it. I wrote the
On,
story,
on
and then I
spec.
sent it out. Oh yeah, yeah,
All on spec. Amazing.
yeah.
So the reason that we're here, the reason that I've come to know your name, and thank you again for doing the show, is that you got this award, Heising Simons Foundation Award, just the other day. I came across the announcement, and frankly, there are lots of awards I wouldn't have noticed, except that the other person who got the award with you is Kavitha Cardozo, who's a really well known and respected journalist who has done a lot of work around schools. Um, the thing that grabbed my attention was that you were not really doing journalism anymore. It was like the person who gets the Pulitzer who's no longer, who's like gone on to be a mountain climber or something like that, right? You're no longer doing journalism right now, and I'm curious about that. But tell us about getting the prize. How did that process happen?
Yeah, they. So I actually hadn't heard about the prize before I got it either, but they emailed me like a month before the announcement, or maybe no, oh, maybe a little bit more than a month before they just announced it. And they said like, "Hey, we want like this. I don't know if you know about this prize or this foundation, but we have like these initiatives to fund journalists. Like, we want to like I don't know. They have like a network of judges and all of that. Like, we want you to be introduced to them." And I was like, "Okay." And so I got on the phone with them. They told me that I had won this prize. It was a total surprise, but I guess they have like a anonymous nomination system where they just like have a few journalists who like nominate people based on work over the past year, particularly on like underrepresented or like misrepresented communities. And yeah, and then they try to make it a surprise to people like me and Kavitha. So that it was complete surprise, but they had liked some of the work that I had done on in Appalachia, particularly about people in addiction recovery, but also I'd written about a lot of different things around there. Yeah.
How did they feel about the fact that you were no longer in journalism, that you'd spurned journalism and moved on?
I don't know if it's like so accurate to say that I'm not in journalism, but I'm definitely not a full time journalist right now. I still do like the occasional freelance thing. And I've been picking up a little bit some more assignments now. So yeah, but they were. I brought that up to them when they called me. I was like, hey, like I don't really know how. Um, how committed I am to the journalism profession. I have reasons for that, that we can get into. But they were like, "Oh no, it's like for work that you've done already." And I was like, "Okay." And I'm not like gonna say no to money or a prize either. So it didn't feel like a morally difficult decision. But I was a little bit confused about that. Yeah. So yeah, yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe they were like, "Hey, if we give him this prize, he'll like want to do more journalism." Yeah, I'm not sure.
Let's talk about the ambivalence or the weaving in and out of journalism. I'm a second career, maybe even third career journalist. I did not do student journalism. I was a teacher.
Yeah.
I worked in politics for a while, and then I
Mhm.
came to journalism like I don't know 25 years ago. And for the last 10 years, I've been running this. media watchdog, let's think about the journalism that we're writing kind of thing. Originally, it was going
Hmm.
to be a part of the Columbia Journalism Review as like a vertical focused on the education beat because education is my thing.
Hmm.
But I have a love hate relationship with journalism, and I often think about this old LCD Sound System story song called "New York, I Love You, but You're Bringing Me Down."
Yeah,
And
yeah,
journalism's the same way for me. I love it. I want it to succeed, and I'm just conflicted about my own participation in it and in the stories that I read, especially if I know the topic really well. It's
yeah,
just really hard to watch sometimes.
yeah.
What's your mix of feelings and experiences?
Yeah. Well, first, no, it's funny that you bring up LCD Sound System. I'm a big fan of LCD Sound System, and my last name is spelled Whang. It gives some people like pronunciation issues. I just pronounce it Wang, but my dad's Korean, which is where it comes from, and the
Uh,
Korean name is Hwang. But we think like they screwed up the spelling at like immigration or something back when his parents came to the
okay.
U.S. And it's a very rare name. Like you'll either see Wang or Hwang.
Right.
And one of the few people, maybe the only person I know other than people in my family with that last name is Nancy Wang of LCD Sound
Oh
System.
wow. Okay.
Her name is Whang. Just a sidebar. Anyway,
Have you guys talked about this? Have you reached out?
no, I haven't, but I
Yeah,
want to. I
you
I
should.
should. Yeah, yeah. That's funny. Yeah, but my ambivalence around journalism. I don't know. Like there are parts of me that yeah, I sort of toggle back and forth between being like, oh, we should sort of be questioning the profession and the values of the profession, sort of like what it's serving these days. And when I'm talking about like journalism, I'm more or less talking about like um, narrative nonfiction or like literary nonfiction because that is the sort of thing that I feel that I'm best at. And that I read the most of, and I sort of feel most drawn to.
Right.
I do really enjoy that sort of stuff, and I think, and but like and I think when I started, you know, 6, 7 years ago, working in journalism, pitching stories, I wasn't really thinking about what their value was. I was just like, oh, I want to get published. I want to like travel and I want to meet interesting people and I want to write about
Right.
these things. And it was like
Right.
it was like, I want to get into the profession. I want to like have a career doing this. And then I think as I, got lucky and had a little bit more success, I started thinking about and also sort of saw the effect that some of these stories were having on people that I wrote about and on readers. I yeah, like all of these questions that maybe for other journalists like foreground their work started coming up for me. So it's this question of like it seemed like when people talk about justifying narrative nonfiction, again, I'm not talking about like holding people in power accountable because I certainly think that's like an important um, role that journalism plays in
Mhm.
society. There are issues with like political reporting and watchdog reporting, investigative reporting, and all that sort of stuff. But I think that's like they often justify themselves as like we're doing a public service, and I think I'm like fairly convinced by that sort of argument when they're done when it's done well. I don't know, but for narrative nonfiction, it's like oh, you're just like you're like telling the story of like some person's life. Maybe like I don't write about celebrities, but like you're just like writing about celebrities, maybe or you're just writing about a normal person, or often in my case, you're writing about people who are going through some sort of like hardship. And often when people just try to justify that kind of work, they say, "Oh, we do this because um, we're like we're showing other people, we're like humanizing issues, we're like humanizing people like they." Lots of readers don't get to encounter in real life, or you sort of expanding our circle of empathy, that sort of thing. We're like showing people the world in a way, and or they're like, oh yeah, we're like changing people's minds in like sort of this more subdermal way. We're not like, oh, like this person's bad, but we're like showing people the complexity of things. Um, and yeah, I think I didn't really question that at first. I was like, oh, this is just good. Like, I'm like taking a story and making it more accessible, taking a person's life and making it more accessible to readers who wouldn't otherwise see that story. Um, and then I was like, well, is that, you know, and then, I did that a few times. And sometimes people who I wrote about were like, wow, this is great. I'm really glad that you wrote about me and that my story is out there, like that I was able to like say my piece and that, my life is sort of reflected in these pages somewhere. But then some people I wrote about were like, "Holy shit, you got it like so wrong," and I'm not like this, and I'm not like my struggle, and you sort of like reduced me to this like this thing. It's not me. It's just this thing. It's like this tool, a character in a story that's used to sort of get across some point to say like this policy is bad, or like the bureaucratic system is difficult, or it could be like a complicated story, but they're just sort of like this. They're like a medium through which that idea is passed. I don't know. I'm sort of intellectualizing this. A lot of times people are just like, that's wrong, and they're like, they come to me, yeah, and I think it did have like legitimate effect on people who are. It has had stories I've written have had legitimate, real effects on people um, who are in those stories that are negative. And when I was like, hey, like, are readers like getting if you're balancing like the net good of this thing, like are readers getting enough good out of this to justify that sort of harm or that's coming to the people I'm writing about? And I'd like to, obviously I'm fallible and I made some mistakes in representing and writing about people, but I always did try to be like, recognize the complexity of people's stories and respect. I try to like, share quotes and like descriptions with people before I publish. And like try to respect their wishes if they like want some sort of detail left out or something like that. But I like regardless of whether I was like doing a good job or not, it was like I was like people were getting hurt, and then then the people who were reading were off either like people like wouldn't read it, or it would just be like the same kind of reactions to the story that they'd have to like some sort of like opinion or commentary piece of like like we should stop Trump from doing X, or like it's all just like I don't know, people like companies being greedy, like that sort of thing, or like I don't
They're
know, it just didn't. What? Sorry.
sorry, they're using your story the way that you might have been accused of using your characters or your sources, right?
Oh yeah.
It's the shit rolling downhill for external purposes.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Yeah, and and then I would be like, yeah, like who's the audience for these sorts of things? And I write for primarily like New York based publications, primarily for like middle to upper middle class audiences and like professional audiences, and yeah, I like I don't know, I just don't really know whether I was like really relating to the
Right.
audience and relating to their reaction to what I was writing, and yeah, and so I started questioning whether it was like just a good thing in general. I was like, is this like a good practice to have? Like I really enjoy literary nonfiction. I really like this stuff, but is it like can it justify itself?
Right.
I think yeah.
Satisfying your curiosity about the world or your ambition or your
Yeah.
readers' pleasures. This is an issue that comes up all the time in education journalism, as you can imagine. People are oftentimes writing about a community that's not their own. They're oftentimes
Yeah.
writing about a community that's been marginalized or disadvantaged in some ways. They're
Hmm.
trying to depict both the challenges, but also the broader humanity of the people that they're describing, and it doesn't always work, right? It doesn't always meet everyone's needs equally. And there are lots of questions about trauma informed journalism. There's a whole center at Columbia about trauma informed journalism. A lot of things have been written about covering communities that aren't your own and how to do that, or whether you should be doing that or not.
Yeah.
And it's really a fraud issue, or it can be a fraud issue for some, and a lot of people just they're like, I'm doing journalism. It's justified by the fact that there's a job title and a pay and
Yeah, yeah.
notoriety and success that come from, don't overthink it. Which brings me to my next question, which is like, what did the editors or mentors or veteran journalists, what was the reaction when you would say, hey, a source just called me and it was really upset with me, or I'm just not really, this feels extractive, or this feels overly narrative. Like, what did you get back from the people that you looked up to in the field or worked with in the field when you raised some of these questions?
Yeah.
Or
I think
assuming you did.
yeah. So one of the I think one of the things that I felt, because I started as a I've spent almost my whole career as a freelancer, which is like a precarious professional position to be in. I never really wanted my editors to feel like I was like
Agreed.
doing something wrong, or like, hurting, yeah, like that I did something wrong or that I wasn't doing something right. So I wouldn't, often when like people, and yeah, when people would like react strongly to something that I wrote, I would like, I don't know, they would like post something on like Facebook, and then
But
I would like respond.
they weren't
Sorry.
they weren't going to your editors and saying, "Hey, this needs a correction or a retraction." This wasn't that kind of
Oh,
situation.
no, no, no. It would often be like they would call me or like text me and like maybe post something on Facebook, and then I would like try to respond on Facebook or like talk to them. And I would try to be like, yeah, I think a lot of what I did and sort of those issues that I faced, I tried to sort of do it on my own. Um, Partially because I didn't want to like burden my editors, like they barely get back to my emails, um, and uh, and and partially because yeah, I felt like it was like my thing to deal with. Sometimes I did talk. I have talked to some of my editors about this, often more abstractly. You know, if I like get assigned a piece, or like, a piece gets, let's say I like submit like a first draft and they come back to me and they're like, hey, like you have to like make sure that this is, talking like more, talking about like the national issues, or like talking about like this big issue. I'll be like, hey, I don't know, like, is this story just like an example to help like prove some larger thesis? Like, I don't think I have a thesis. Maybe the publication has a thesis. I
Right.
might talk to the editor about that, or sometimes they'll like package it. Like the headline will be something like that I feel is somewhat clickbaity, or like sort of, yeah, like feeds into this, into the more uh, uh, like black and white dialectic that often goes around policy and poverty, that sort of stuff. And they'll just be like, yeah, well, there's like, what we need to do is like a paper and a magazine to like get clicks and keep our
Mhm.
business viable in like
Mhm.
this day and age. And then there's like what you do, which is like something else. It's like more representative or narrative stuff. And I can sort of see that thing. But yeah, sorry. To get back around to your question though, I was like, yeah, I mean, I would, my editors, like they recognize, I think I work with very good editors, and I think they really recognize these issues. But there's a little bit of, and I feel this, I question myself when I have the sort of these existential worries about like the profession and value of narrative and nonfiction storytelling. I'm like, maybe you should just like get over yourself. Like, this is something that people do, and it's your job, and you make money doing it. And I think a lot of editors are just like, yeah, I recognize, people in a lot of professions do this. Like, yeah, I recognize sort of like the moral difficulty of, where I stand and in like the profession, the broader world, and
Mhm.
yeah, but in society, but like, this is my job. Like, I need to do the thing that I'm paid to do. And it's kind of like this adolescent concern of being like, oh my God, like, is this really what I should be doing? And like overly questioning yourself to the point of exhaustion often,
Mhm.
often doesn't get much accomplished. So I do think, yeah, like, and I see the value in just doing the job too. So yeah, I feel like often my editors are more lean towards that pragmatism, whereas I will lean more towards sort of this, yeah, like frustrated reflection.
One last thing on this, and I thank you so much for reflecting on this publicly, because it's tough, right? Um, did you have a story that you either regretted doing or regretted accepting edits, or that you had to do a correction on, or that you didn't do a correction on and wished you did a correction on? Is there like a gut check story for you?
um, yeah, yes. So I think, um, let me see how I'll try to phrase this. Um, so I wrote a story. I'm gonna keep it like somewhat vague because I don't want like, yeah, I'll keep it somewhat vague. But I did write a story about a woman who was going through a very difficult time back in like 2021 or 2022. I think I published it,
Mm.
um, in like a very prominent magazine, and the everything that I wrote in there was like accurate, um, factually. I mean, there's sort of this is the other question when it comes to narrative form of like, okay, whatever people make this sort of distinction between substance and style. It's like, okay, well, you get all the facts right. Like, is the style, are you like, is this like poverty porn, or is it like, just sort of like a straightforward encyclopedia thing? Is it like a biography of this person? Are you like dramatizing, all these sorts of things that like color the facts and have as much of a role to play in accurate representation as the facts themselves. Um, there was that, but all the facts were right. Been fact checked pretty rigorously by the fact checkers. Um, but the story like really focused on the woman's struggle. She had been in a lot of like she had. I don't know, like she had made some unfortunate choices sort of prior to the story, and then like she was sort of caught up in this drama with with this other person, and after the story published, like she like I tried to keep in touch with her, but she like she was like, how can we like take it down? And I was like, why do you want to take it down? She's like, I don't, she didn't really give me that many reasons. And then she like stopped responding to me, and I was like, okay, I'll just leave her alone. And then she reached out again like a year ago or so, and then she wanted me to write about her again,
Mm.
because she was going through another difficult time. But like it turned out, she was like, yeah, they'd used. I don't know like how true this is, but this is what she told me. She was like, yeah, uh, you know, um, the uh, like this the story that I wrote and sort of the details that were in the story had been used in court, um,
Mm.
uh, and she had, and personally as a result of that, she had lost custody of her kid, um, which I don't know. It really hurt to like think that, the story that I wrote had that sort of effect on her, whatever. You could say there are ways to say like, oh, it wasn't your fault. She knew what she was signing up for, something like that. Like, I actually don't think many people, unless they're celebrities or famous, like know what they're signing up for when they agree to be written about by a narrative journal. Whatever. There's like that Joan Didion thing, like writers always selling someone out. And people don't know what it I often don't understand what it is to like give up their agency to tell their story to this random person, regardless of how nice you seem. So yeah, I actually don't. Yeah, I don't think that's a good
Yeah.
excuse. And I just think, yeah, it's like that's like haunted me. I'm gonna be like, is that really? I don't know. Was like it worth it? Like I think it was a good story. Like I go back and read it. Like, oh, it's a good story. Like obviously, maybe there was like I think maybe there was like a GoFundMe like creative. I don't know, but yeah. Then when I think about like what, how did this actually affect her? Yeah, really. I think it ended up really hurting her, and I think she probably wishes she had never done it in the
Right.
first place.
Right.
And in some ways, I sort of wish that I hadn't done it either because I'm like, what? Why? But yeah, yeah, that story. Yeah, there are a few others, but that one in particular
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah, I get it.
comes
And
to
again,
mind.
I appreciate you talking about it. A lot of what people talk about when they're talking with me or writing pieces for the grade has to do with
Uh-huh.
reflecting on pieces. I've had people tell me about award-winning pieces that they really regret, um, and I think that the reflection is, uh, as long as it's not endless, isn't gratuitous. It's important, and we should all think about it. Um, let's talk a little bit about the upside, if we can, of literary nonfiction. Can you
Yeah.
say a little bit about people whose work brought you into wanting to do this in the first place, or people whose work still seems admirable to you? I've talked to a
Hmm.
bunch of people. Casey Parks comes to mind. Eli Saslow, I've talked to him.
Hmm.
I talked to a young guy who wrote about a school in Arizona named Chandler Fritz, who seems like he does really interesting work. Who are the people who make you feel good about this, or have made you feel good about this?
Yeah. Let's see. I My favorite book, nonfiction book, is called Random Family by Adrienne Nicole
Right,
LeBlanc or
right.
LeBlanc. I love that book. I think it's like, uh, yeah, it's like high form of art to me. So yeah, when I think about like literary nonfiction, I'm like that's kind of at the pinnacle for me.
Uh-huh.
I like, Catherine Boo's stuff. Her writing for like the New Yorker and Washington Post before that, and then her book. Obviously, I looked up to that a lot. I was, yeah, I one of my so like the one journalism class I took in college was with John McPhee. He teaches a class at Princeton. He's sort
Yeah.
of this, science non literary nonfiction guy. And he like took everyone's writing very seriously. And that was partially when I started taking my writing seriously. And I really liked his like just sort of open eyed sort of eagerness they sort of like, apply to everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, those people, obviously really like Joan Didion. Um, but yeah, in terms of like, oh, sorry. Yeah.
I was just going to say, is there anyone out there sort of currently whose work seems like it reaches that same kind of standard, or maybe not?
I don't know. Yeah, no, I'm sure there are, hmm, let me think.
It's
I do like, yeah, well, um, I do like Eli Saslow stuff. So when I was first like starting to write narrative nonfiction, I would like I still read all of his stuff. I really like his style. Let's see.
There's another guy in the education journalism world. He's not an education reporter, but he writes about schools occasionally. Is named John or David Woodrew Fox. You know that
Okay,
guy?
I don't know. Maybe I've like read their stuff. I feel like maybe I'm like exposing how like not tapped in I am to the journalism world. But I do, Alec McGillis. I read all of his stuff
Yeah.
on like ProPublica. Um, like there was a writer down uh, in West Virginia who I know, Eric Eyre, who wrote a book about the opioid crisis. Um, Down there, and very good investigative journalist. Also, really like his book. Yeah, I liked. Um, oh, now I'm like forgetting about. There was. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess. Mm,
Well,
yeah, I
we
like
can.
follow magazines, but I feel like maybe I don't. Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
If it comes back to you, tell me afterwards, and I'll put it in the show notes. Don't worry about it at all.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
But it does bring me
Yeah.
to my next question and last question. Thank you again for talking so
Yeah.
candidly and so interestingly. You're now writing a novel, right? So you're not writing, if I understand correctly, you're not writing a nonfiction book. You're writing a
Yeah.
novel, and I gotta ask, why a novel? I've been tempted to do
Why a
this
novel?
myself. I've never done it, but yeah, you're a literary nonfiction guy, and now you're writing a novel. So tell us about that. Maybe it's not as unusual as I think it is, but it seems like a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how rare it is. It feels like everyone I talk to is thinking about or currently writing a novel. I didn't know this, but I guess it's a thing, which is surprising because no one I know reads. So
Well,
the
doesn't it all connect to your thoughts or your experiences
yeah.
doing nonfiction?
So yeah, 100%. When I was like questioning the value of this kind of work, a lot of me was like, oh, maybe there's like an aesthetic value, sort of this intrinsic value to the
Right.
work itself. When you like write, like where's like this artistry? You feel it when you read. I feel it when I read like Didion. I feel it when I read like these really great works of literary nonfiction that I love. Um, and um, and I do think that's like a place where there's value. It's in sort of like the form, in like the whatever the the syntax, and I was like, yeah, well, I do really like that. I want to write as beautifully as possible. I want to like create art, and it just felt like doing a novel was a way to sort of like pursue that value,
Right.
um, without like the moral issues that come along with writing about real people. Obviously, I do really like representative arts, like they represent people anyway. So, but when they're not like actual individuals,
Mhm.
it like takes some of the burden off of me and can allow me to sort of think about like, well, what's sort of the point of what I'm doing in this like formal aesthetic fashion. And I really like that about fiction. That was part of why I wanted to do that. It was also, yeah, I just felt like, yeah, I wanted a little bit more freedom to write, and just I still feel, but it's difficult because I read like a really great work of nonfiction. Like it doesn't need to have like the same, sentence by sentence beauty of like, I don't know, like I really like James Salter. It's like, okay, like is every sentence like a James Salter sentence in like a nonfiction book? Um, Probably not. But the
Right.
fact that it's real, it's so not, it's so valuable to me. I'm like, wow, this is like a thing that happened out in the world, and this is like these are real people, and that really does, it like affect me in a way. So I totally do, and I still see that's why I continue to write nonfiction. But yeah, sort of not having the cage of reality on you can be kind of freeing, I think, as a writer. That's why I
Right.
was writing the novel.
That makes total sense, and maybe you end up going back and forth because there's a freedom to the novel, and then there's the added value of real discovering and representing actual facts.
Mm-hmm.
It's a divided. Trying to write a great nonfiction book is it has some extra challenges, but maybe you end up going back and forth. Maybe that's the route to happiness.
Maybe. I mean, back in the day, what like all those, what Hemingway, Vonnegut, Carver, they all started as like journalists and then ended up going into fiction. But
Right.
again, that was like back in the day. Who knows whether anyone's going to read anything in 10 years.
I could ask you questions forever, but I promise not to. You've been really generous with your time and your insights. Thanks so much for talking. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Alexander.
Okay, that was great.